Hey, welcome back. Okay, you're in for a little bit of a treat because I do not have a to-do list for this video. I'm just going to wing it. And hopefully that won't result in too much rambling. Oh, too late. Okay. So, we're back at the sequencer. This song is our familiar little simple song that we wrote. And we're going to start working with the rack right away. So, if you're on Windows 7, you can hit Windows key left on the arrow pad, and that's going to bring it down to a little cool half window. Because of some of the limitations of the size of the windows on Reason, we can't have them immediately lined up, like right one and the other like that. They have to be a little bit overlapping, but that's all right. It doesn't really matter. So don't freak out when you see all these faders and dials and bells and whistles and stuff. You'll get to know what they all do, and it'll be just really easy to use. So a couple things that we can carry over, a couple concepts we can carry over from the sequencer. First off is we've got our little mini map here on the side. We can't grab and scroll yet because we don't have enough stuff that we need to scroll. So the mini map over here. Another thing that we can take, another concept we can take is the use of these little triangles that you can use to minimize pieces of hardware in the rack, which is quite useful because if we're done messing around with our drum machine, we can minimize it, and then we can just only have the bass and the piano open or something like that. A lot of devices you'll also see will have other little triangles on them. For example, this, and that's going to show us some more stuff. But to manage complexity, we can keep them all closed like this. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about with the rack is how to make sure that you can add an instrument and that you can hear the instrument. All instruments in Reason 6, in order to hear them, the audio from these instruments needs to find its way to the big mixer, which is over here on my other monitor. I'll just bring it over just for a sec. This big mixer right here. Basically, the signal that's coming from an instrument needs to find its way to the mixer. The easiest way to do that is to add one of these little guys called a mix device and have your instrument connected to the mix device, and then it will correspond to a channel in the mixer. As you can see on the rack, we've got our drum machine here, and then we've got our drum mix device. We've got our little bass here and our bass mix device, which is minimized. We've got our piano and our piano mix device, and you can ignore these two guys up here for now. Basically what that means is that if we go to our mixer, we've got piano, bass, and drums. And that means that we're going to be able to hear those because they're on the mixer there. So whenever you're adding an instrument, if you're new to Reason, just you gotta know that it's gotta somehow find its way to one of these little mix devices. It can be routed through a bunch of other devices, but eventually it has to get to one of these if you want to hear it. So we're going to explore very briefly one of the coolest features of Reason, which is flipping the rack around, which you can hit the tab key and it'll flip the rack to the back. So now we can see our drum machine from the back, we can see our mix device from the back, and our bass and our piano. Oh, sorry. This is our bass, this is our piano, and these are the two mix devices for those, respectively. So right here we've got our left channel and our right channel hooked up with cables into the left and right inputs on the mix device. And that's really all there is to it. Same one with this, it's hooked up. Same one with this, it's hooked up. Now let's flip it back around. So that's the reason that we're able to hear our very simple song over here in the sequencer. If I place the looping points around it and we listen to our little song here, and we go back to our rack, you can see that whenever notes are hit in the sequencer, the devices will show this little note lighting up. And for the drums especially, you can see each individual drum lighting up as it's played. So let's play through it once. All right, cool. So another cool thing about Reason is that when you're in the sequencer and you click on a track, it's going to flash that device in the rack just so you can kind of know where it is, which is very, very useful when you're just getting started in Reason. So I click that. As you can see, the drum machine over here flashes. I click the bass, and this guy flashes over here. So let's mess around a little bit in the rack just to see if we can change the noise of what's going on a little bit. So let's go back to the sequencer. Let's mute the bass and the drums, and let's just hear the piano. As you can see, if we turn down the volume here, we don't hear the piano at all. I can turn it slowly back up now. We could change the type of piano that we're hearing. I'll start turning up the chorus on that. So all these instrument devices have a number of different ways that you can modify the sound built in. You have a very limited way of modifying the sound on these little ID8 instrument devices, but still you get, two little dials here, and then there's usually something hooked up with this little mod wheel here that you can change, and that'll change the sound too. Most instrument devices that are going to allow you to play a melodic instrument will have a little pitch wheel here that's kind of on a spring. It'll snap back into position, and that's kind of like you'd find on a synthesizer or a keyboard or something like that. So let's actually hear that in action just for fun. Down here on the drum machine, there are little pitch wheels, as you can see here, but they're not so much wheels as there are dials, and they just kind of stick into position. They don't spring back. So for now, let's forget about the sequencer for a minute. Let's minimize it, and let's maximize the rack. In Reason 6, which is a really cool feature, you used to only be able to pile stuff vertically in the rack, but now you can pile it horizontally as well, which is another great way of managing complexity. You can select one device. I'm holding Shift to select a second device as well, and I'm going to move it over here. And I'm going to select that, Shift select to select that, move that over here. All right, great. Now you can see in our mini map, we got 3 different columns of devices. And that just already made it a lot easier to look at. Got our piano over here, bass here, and our drums here. Now, if we go back to the sequencer real quick, we can see that we just have a little looping song of just piano here. The other 2 are muted. So let's just remember that that's what we're working with. The first thing I want to do is I want to spice up this piano a little bit. I'm going to bring it back to a grand piano. I'm going to turn the volume up a little bit, but I want to add a little bit of reverb to it to give it more of the sense that we're in like a much, like we're in a large cathedral or something like that. So if we add some reverb, it's just going to make it sound cooler, basically. So the way we do that, the way we add effects to instruments in Reason is first we add the effects box. I highly recommend that anytime you're adding a new device, if you're new to Reason, every time you're adding a new device, hold down the Shift key while you're adding it. And what that is going to do is it's going to tell Reason that you do not want it to be automatically routed with cables. Later on, you can kind of get the hang of letting Reason automatically route your cables for you, because you'll go, oh, okay, that's what it did. I understand now. But in the beginning, let's do the routing for ourselves. So hold down Shift, then just right-click anywhere in the black space, go down to Effects, and let's add an RV7 digital reverb. That's just this tiny little device right here. So let's hit Tab and turn the rack around. And we're going to grab the reverb device and we're going to bring them. This doesn't really matter so much, but visually, I like to have my signal flow visually in the same direction as where the cables are going. So, for example, this is our piano device. If the piano device is going to flow through the reverb into the mix channel, I just kind of like the reverb to be in between. It just makes sense to me. But it doesn't really matter. You could have the reverb all the way over here and still just do cables bouncing back and forth, and it, same thing. But I'm going to keep it down here. Or in between here, I should say. So if you grab cables from anywhere that's hooked up, it'll disconnect them. If you drag them into like the black space, it'll disconnect them. So that's what I did. So now I'm going to grab the left, drag it to the left input here. It'll automatically route the right. If it's coming from a stereo device, it'll usually automatically route the right. And then I'm going to grab the left out and pop it in there, and it automatically routed the right one for me. Now let's flip it back around. So now we've got this piano hooked up into this reverb, and then the reverb is outputting into this mix channel here. Pretty straightforward. So let's look at a couple of these dials on the reverb. We've got the size, which is like the size of the simulated room that we're in. Hall is the simulated room that we're using right now. The decay is how long the reverb effect is going to persist after a note has been pressed and released. The damp, I think, has to do with how much of the higher frequencies of the signal are going to be affected by the reverb. I could be wrong, though. And the dry-wet knob is very important. A lot of effects that you're going to see in Reason have a dry-wet knob. And what that means is right now it's all the way to wet, which means if you want to think about it in terms of like a liquid, you can think that right now this reverb is literally going to soak the piano. The piano is going to be soaked in reverb. If we put it all the way back down to dry, then we don't even need this reverb box here because it's not doing anything to the signal. It would be the same thing as if we just hit bypass up here on the corner. So I think I'm just going to put a little bit of wetness because I only want a little bit of this reverb. I'll keep it on dry for now, and then I'll play, and then you can hear as I turn up the reverb. You could hear when I put it all the way to wet, you couldn't even hear the piano anymore. You could really only hear what the reverb was producing from the piano. So you usually don't want it that wet. You want it, just a little bit, just to add a flavor of reverb to it. And now, maybe I want to put it up to large Hall, turn the size up a bit, turn the decay down a little bit, and maybe a little bit more like that. That's kind of nice. It kind of brings it's like the piano is being recorded in a completely different space than before, and that's kind of the flavor that I wanted to go for. Now, let's spice up this bass a little bit. First, we'll minimize, go back to the sequencer, and we're going to unmute the bass. We're going to mute the piano, and we're going to bring the looping points over here just so that we're only hearing bass now. Let's go back to the rack. So what would spice up this bass a little bit? We could turn it into a finger bass. Let's try that. Screw that. I like the pick bass better. But you know what? Let's hold Shift again, right-click, go to Effects, and let's add a Scream 4 distortion device, which is a really quick way to add a lot of flavor to any sound. I'm going to drag it in between just so visually it looks better. And I'm going to hit Tab, and I'm going to disconnect these wires. I'm going to connect them up like that. Connect them up like that. Great. Now we're all hooked up. And if we hit play, we're going to hear a pretty different bass sound. And that's because we are using distortion right now. We can select a number of different ways to kind of damage or destroy the sound. Right now we're on distortion. We can go over to overdrive here. And we can turn the damage up a bit if we want. All right, I kind of like that. Let's just stick with that for a little bit, and then you know what? Let's add a little bit of something to the drum track over here. Let's hold shift, go back to our effects, and what do we want to add here? You know what? I'm going to add the same thing, but I'm going to change it around a little bit. So let's put it in between here. Go to the back by hitting tab, unhook this, hook it up through the Scream 4. That's kind of cool. It's a little bit too intense though. Let's turn the damage down a bit. Let's turn the master volume up a little bit. All right, maybe we'll keep it on overdrive instead of distortion. All right, now let's go back to the sequencer. Let's unmute the drums and the piano. Let's just kind of see how this sounds here. Whoa, okay, that bass is like too loud. It's drowning out the piano. So let's go here and turn down the master volume on the Scream 4 a little bit. Okay, cool. Let's bring it back, unsolo it, and hit play again. All right, so, you know, it's not phenomenal, but we've added a little bit more flavor now. In fact, something that I might like to do right here is to go back and add just a little bit of reverb to the drums to kind of make it sound cool. Now, what's really important to know about Reason is the way you hook up, the order in which you run your signals through your effects boxes will affect the way that they sound. For example, think of it like this. I'm going to unhook all these cables. If I hook up the drum machine into the Scream 4, and then I hook the Scream 4 into the reverb, and then the reverb into the mix channel, we're going to be hearing some drums that are distorted with some reverb on it. But if I were to hook up the drums into the reverb unit, then into the Scream 4, then into the mix channel, we're going to be hearing some drums that have some reverb on it, and all of that is going to be distorted. And that's going to give us a distinctly different sound because we're going to be hearing a bunch of reverb coming out of drums, and even that reverby sound, this kind of wide open reverberation, is going to be distorted by this box. It's going to give us like just a much different sound. So just keep that in mind because the order in which you chain your effects together will give you a very different flavor. So for now, I'm just going to distort the stuff first and then run it through reverb. And even though we're going to get some, distortion on the drums, which I want, the reverb is still going to sound pretty crisp and clean. It's not going to be all distorted. We don't want too much, so let's just go back here, loop just the drums, solo the drums. All right, that sounds good. And one last thing, I'm going to go back and change this back to distortion and up the damage a little bit. Cool, I like that a lot. All right, let's hear this one more time. All right, now let's just touch on the mixer very briefly. I'm going to bring this guy down to a half window, and I'm going to minimize the rack because I do not really need the rack involved anymore. Let's bring the mixer over, and let's bring the mixer into a half window here. So when we hit play, you'll start to see, okay, here's the piano here. We can see some signal. And you can start to see how much signal is coming through on each of these mix channels here. And again, we've got, mute and solo, which are different buttons than the sequencer's mute and solo, but they essentially do the same thing. And it seems to me that in our song, it seems to me that the drums are still a little bit loud. So, we could use the mixer here to bring the drums down just a little bit. So that's the most basic feature of the mixer is these master faders here. Um, for each mix channel, the master fader down here, or I guess you could just call them the fader for each mix channel. You use that to control the overall volume of the track. And yes, there are many other places within Reason that you can control the volume of the track, but this is kind of like the buck stops here. This is kind of like the final volume control. And then this is the master volume controls. It controls the volume of the entire song. So, and just a word or two about the mixer while we're at it. We got two little mini maps here for the mixer because each mixer strip has so many different controls. You need a little mini map because you can scroll through all of them like this. And on the top, we got another little mini map here. I can't use it yet because I haven't filled up enough mix channels. But suppose if I went like this, here we go. There, I can kind of scroll through. That's a little bit awkward, but this is built for just massive power. You can just do so much in this program. So that's why they have so much stuff here. It seems a little ridiculous when you're first starting out because you're like, I am never going to need all this stuff, and you probably won't ever need all of it, but eventually you're going to get the hang of using all this stuff, and you're going to go, okay, never mind, that's super useful. But just don't be daunted by it in the beginning. I guess that's about it for this video. In the next video, I think what I want to do is I'm just going to start a basic trance song from scratch and just go through some of the very basic elements of creating the structure of a trance song and kind of the soundscape of a trance song. And along the way, we can learn more about effects devices and equalizers and stuff like that, and how to make drum patterns that work for electronic music, and how to pick samples that work specifically for the style of music that you're going for. We're just going to use some default samples for now from the Reason factory sound bank. Okay,